My name is Bruce Cowper. I'm part of the what we call the Trusted Cloud team. Basically, my life revolves around providing you guys with information on things like compliance and security and privacy as it relates to the cloud. So put it this way. Actually, good question. How many of you know about the Trust Center at Microsoft on Microsoft.com? One, two. That's awesome. Right, by the end of this session, you will all know about the Trust Center. It's one of those resources that I've been sort of in the booth just around here talking about a lot. I get a lot of questions that come along and say, hey, where is the information on GDPR? Where are all the compliance documentations? Where are your maps of sort of feature functionality to compliance requirements? So if you remember nothing else from this conversation, Microsoft.com/trust. All of the content, our content is already on there. I will be sharing some URLs at the end of this conversation. So for those of you who've just joined, this presentation is really a primer on GDPR. So as you can sort of see, Microsoft's commitment to the General Data Protection Regulation, which is the new set of regulations that's coming into Europe next year. So one common question I get is, hey, is this something that I have to pay attention to because we're in the US? In essence, any company that provides services to Europeans, no matter where they are in the world, and specifically that requires you to collect personal private information, everybody who does those things will be subject to GDPR requirements. So GDPR is coming into force as of May 25th, 2018. So yes, I did say 2018 rather than this year, so you do have a little bit of time, and that's why I'm having the conversation now. The other piece that you should know is not only does sort of GDPR have very broad-ranging sort of sets of requirements, and specifically for customers, there's a very broad set of customers or as folks that need to be GDPR compliant. There are a couple of really important pieces that you need to know. Number one is it provides European citizens specifically with enhanced privacy rights. And I'm actually going to go through some of what those mean because they're often big departures from what we're used to dealing with today. Secondly is it's starting to put the onus back on us in terms of protecting customers' data. Now, we've always taken privacy to be incredibly important. Oh, sorry. But at the end of the day, the difference is that the new legislation actually puts the onus from a legal standpoint on us protecting our customers' data. It introduces things like mandatory breach reporting, 72-hour reporting sort of when you've discovered the breach. That is often very, very hard for organizations to do. And so a big part of this will be, hey, well, what are the things that I need to do? What are the things that are available for me to do? What are the response plans that I have to put in place? And so this session is to give you sort of some idea of what it is that you can start to bring to bear based on things like current technology, essentially to help make this happen. One of the biggest things and biggest reasons that this is important is the fines are now up to 4% of global revenue. So if you were to take an example of, say, Target, current estimates for the Target breach are between like $250 and $450 million. Just the non-compliance fine alone for them, if it happened sort of after July next year, would be $3 billion. So you can see that that's a big reason that we have to pay attention to this. And so what I thought I would do is sort of take you through some of the major points and give you some pointers of how you can start to address some of the GDPR requirements today. So the first one is the personal privacy. So GDPR brings a number of pieces that typically we don't do today. So it's as sort of a general industry. One of them is the requirement that a customer can come to you and say, I want to know about all of the data that you hold on me. And I want to be able to see it, and I want to be able to make corrections on that data. And so that means that not only do you need to understand what data you hold for people, where's it located in case you need to change it, you need to be able to understand what are the protections in place. The context that the data is being used within your business. So this is a fairly sort of broad-ranging set of requirements that, in all honesty, most of you probably have started thinking about in some way, shape, or form today around just sort of good data management policies. But at the end of the day, this sort of puts it into a legal framework. It also brings the requirement that customers have the right to be forgotten. So in other words, you have to be in a position to be able to understand or collect all of their data and remove it from your systems and prove that you have removed it from your systems. And how many of us today sort of have those types of abilities and requirements? The other really interesting piece about GDPR is there's a whole bunch of technology pieces that typically we're sort of used to dealing with around things like security, around compliance, etc. The difference is that a big part of GDPR is about the people and process. And what I mean by that is the requirements where you have a sort of a legal obligation to prove that you're handling, for example, the request for people correction of data or data erasure. You actually have to be in a position to essentially demonstrate your capability from a compliance perspective, and of course, from a regulatory perspective, actually follow through with it. And that's going to be a sort of a really interesting sort of piece of the puzzle. So what I think is, from a policy side, it's going to come down to is sort of two buckets. One is your transparent policies. And what I mean by that are things like today, it's often we collect data and we use it in whichever way makes the most sense for helping our customers get access to products and services. But what GDPR does is say that, okay, you can only use the data for the purposes it was meant to be used for that you stated in the collection of that data. Now, there are certainly countries around the world that have those types of policies. Canada and many actually of the European countries also have those policies today. But for example, in the US, if we get somebody's data for a marketing perspective, often we can keep reusing that data. Those sorts of things are going to change if it's sort of European citizen data. A couple of other sort of big pieces that are worth noting is things like publishing your policies around data retention and deletion. How long do you keep the data for? What types of sort of backups do you use? Where's that data actually located? Because there may be things like requirements around sort of extraterritorial or territorial information. There's another piece of the puzzle which is training, and essentially the people piece of the puzzle. A couple of the pieces that have come in, are coming in with GDPR is organizations with more than 250 employees are now going to be required to have their own data protection officer. Interesting stat, there's current thinking that will require something like, I've seen estimates from 75,000 to over 100,000 data protection officers. So if anybody is a data protection officer or wants to be a data protection officer, you're going to be really happy that there's going to be lots of job opportunities coming up. But what it actually means for organizations, beyond having to hire people to do sort of the work of a data protection officer, is implementation of things like impact assessments, privacy impact assessments. So what does it mean if the data is leaked? What type of data might be leaked? How are you protecting that data? What might be the impact to the individual if that data is leaked? And essentially putting the right policies and processes in place to help essentially address those types of issues. And I don't mean just a bunch of security policies. It's about how the data is being handled, how the breach notification is being handled, essentially how you're going to try and remediate and stop these types of issues from occurring. So as you can sort of see, this is actually turning into a very, very broad scope set of requirements, set of regulations that unfortunately for many organizations are way beyond what they do today. So there are some good pieces of news as we sort of go through this process. One of them is partially sort of the Microsoft commitment to GDPR. So if you can imagine, so we have our customers around the world who essentially we take and hold their personal private information within our systems. And as you can imagine, we use all of our own systems like Office 365 and Azure and Dynamics, etc. So all of the things that we have to do for our customers directly means that we are required to sort of be GDPR compliant. So no great surprise there. The other piece which is specifically important to companies like Microsoft is you also use our services and build on top of our platforms, which means that we are required not just to be GDPR compliant ourselves, but in essence to help you become GDPR compliant. And so there's a few specific ways that we're going to be doing that over the next sort of few months or so. The first one is, in essence, we're going through investing in a lot of technology pieces of the puzzle to help our customers actually do things like data search or data discovery, get appropriate audit logs, make sure that all of the tools that we're using can help us essentially achieve GDPR compliance. So there's a bunch of investments that we're going through from that perspective. And just being transparent with you, we have to do that in order for us ourselves to become GDPR compliant. But the other two pieces of our commitment are, number one is making sure that we are doing that in a timely fashion, that whatever we produce in terms of tools and technology means that you can then pick up those tools and technology to help you become GDPR compliant as well. So in other words, we can't wait until 25th of May 2018. We actually have to do that a lot sooner because you guys have the requirement to be there. The other piece that we're going to be doing is sharing a lot of the lessons that we learn as we go through things like the audit processes to help you achieve that. And so the reason I'm telling you this is essentially at this point in time, we've made our commitment to not only becoming GDPR compliant, but helping our customers become GDPR compliant. But more importantly, as we go over the next sort of few months or so, you can expect to see an awful lot more coming out of Microsoft that is directly in place to help you become GDPR compliant. Now, there is some good news beyond that. And that's what can you do today? So what we're essentially doing is breaking our information down into a number of buckets, because essentially think of these as steps to becoming GDPR compliant. So as I mentioned, the first step is understanding what data you have, where it resides, who has access to it, the context in which it's being used, and in many cases, a lot of the pieces that perhaps you should be doing for your business in general. Now, the good news with this is that we actually think that the vast majority of the technology that you probably have today, if you're using Microsoft, especially our cloud services, most of the technology that you would perhaps want to be able to use from a discovery perspective probably already exists. And I'll give you a good example. So if you go up to Office 365, does anybody here use the e-discovery tools within Office 365? Now, that's actually the response I expected to get. It's one of those things that an awful lot of people have turned around and said, hey, I don't quite know why these tools are really important for me to be using today. I don't have specific requirements. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do is, if you're using Office 365 today, go and look up the e-discovery tools. Those are specifically designed to help you do things like find personal private information, help you understand where it's located, and the whole sort of who has access to it. And it's really designed to help you sort of essentially think of it as build a database, for want of a better term or phrase, of what information you have, and essentially the sort of the where it is and how it's being protected. So there's a whole bunch of tools like the e-discovery tools within Office 365 and Azure and many others that are available to you today that get you certainly a good chunk of the way there. Control. Now, it's interesting. Control is one of those things that could be seen in two ways. Control from a business perspective of how am I using this data? Is it for marketing? Is it for program development? Whatever research, whatever it happens to be. There is another context that I often get asked about, which is doing things like controlling access to the data. So I suspect that you're controlling access to your data today. Really, the whole point about GDPR is being able to sort of not just control access to the data, but really understand what is happening with that data and how it's being used. Protect. And this is, of course, all about security. That's why you're here at RSA, learning about the latest sort of security tools, etc. And those are going to become even more important when you sort of think about and understand that if there is, for example, a security breach, you have a 72-hour requirement to be able to notify not only the authorities, but also your customers about the breach. And of course, you know at that point, they're going to ask you, how did the breach occur? What was the information that was leaked? What was the impact to me? And so all of those pieces suddenly become much, much more important when there's large fines that might be involved. So as I say, on the protect side of it, The good news is that there are lots of opportunities, there are lots of companies that will help you do that. That's really going to be a lot of more perhaps documentation and understanding how you're protecting that data today, but perhaps being a little more cognizant of categorization of data. And I think that's going to be one of the big pieces. Reporting. One of the big issues that a lot of people have, and that I see, I certainly used to do a lot of investigations in this space, was when a breach actually occurs, or when I'm collecting data, and if somebody comes along, say from an ISO 27001 perspective, and says, do you know where your data is? Do you know who has all of those sorts of pieces? It's going to start to become even more important to sort of demonstrate through the reporting that you do and the audits that you use to be able to sort of essentially map the requirements of GDPR to essentially how you're sort of dealing with the types of requests that you're going to be getting. And what I mean by that is, as an example, is if somebody comes to you and says, I want to review the data, and once I'm satisfied that I understand what data you have, I'm going to make a decision as to whether you should be holding my data or not, i.e. the right to be forgotten. And the onus is going to come onto the company, like yours and like Microsoft, to be able to say, okay, we have followed a reasonable process of documenting the requests that we get, the responses that we take, and being able to prove that we took the appropriate steps based on the requirements. And the review piece, in all honesty, is just because whenever you take on something like this, it's not a point-in-time activity. Infrastructure changes, your data changes, the context that you use your data in change the whole time. And so it's really important to think of GDPR as not another Y2K where there is a big moment in time that I have to pay attention to, but it's perpetual thereafter. There is a lot of sort of speculation, and just sort of being transparent with you, there's a lot of speculation that a lot of the existing compliance requirements that have come out of Europe and elsewhere, so like the ISO 27018 and 27017, which are the cloud privacy and security, will map to a large extent to the GDPR requirements. But over the next sort of few months, we're actually going to be sort of publishing a lot more information to help you essentially map things like the GDPR requirements to the technologies that you may already have today, and then start to give you a roadmap of what's coming down the pipe so that you can address your sort of GDPR requirements specifically. Now, one of the big things is where are we going to be posting this content, and where have we posted all of the information to date? So it's just Microsoft.com/GDPR. So it's a sort of second URL. If you remember nothing else, it's the Trust Center and the GDPR URL. And today we've posted up a whole bunch of content on things like the major services. So Azure Office 365, Dynamics, EMS, and certainly things like Windows 10, to help you essentially look at what is available today from a technology standpoint that directly maps to some of the GDPR requirements that you have. Now, I'm going to be honest and say it's not going to get you to the full GDPR requirements set. But at the end of the day, I would strongly encourage you to keep coming back to the GDPR site, because over the next few months, I'm going to be publishing a whole raft of white papers and other content that's going to help you get closer and closer to the solution. Now, the other side of that is, once we have finished our compliance, which we're working on right now, that's when we're going to start sharing, hopefully by the middle of this year, that's when we're going to start sharing a lot more information about what we had to go through as a data handler and a data processor. Will be pretty much exactly the same things that you would have to go through with the appropriate solutions. So right at the start, I mentioned this was a primer. I know that you probably want sort of more information than we've sort of covered here in our sort of quick 15-minute conversation, but if you come around the corner, there are a number of us that are standing in the compliance area, and we're happy to have a deeper conversation with you. And I'd also strongly suggest going up to the site, and hopefully, and there'll certainly be more information than we've had to do, than we've been able to cover today. And certainly, I would encourage you to go to the stand there and fill in the feedback form. Because if nothing else, tell them that you want to hear more about these types of content, and then I can make it happen. So thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm just here and happy to take any questions that you have.